He was 18 when he inherited a key to a hole in the ground. What he discovered inside would rewrite not just his future, but every single thing he believed about his past. If you've ever felt like the world left you standing alone with nothing, stay with me. Hit that subscribe button. This one's for you. The lawyer's office reeked of aged paper and a quiet, expensive kind of defeat. I knew that smell. Social workers' cubicles had it. Case managers' desks carried a version of it. But here, the scent wore a different suit. This was the fragrance of money. Even money that had dried up long ago. My social worker, a woman named Carol who carried exhaustion like a second skin, had called the whole thing a formality. Zero, she'd said. Flat, sterile. Like she was reading a label off a jar. You're his next of kin. You have to be there. So there I sat, one day past my 18th birthday. Officially expelled from the state's care. Planted in a leather chair that cost more than everything I owned, and everything I owned fit inside the duffel bag slumped between my feet. The chair groaned softly when I shifted, a low, leathery exhale of protest. I felt like an intruder in my own body. The suit they'd pulled from a donation bin pinched across my shoulders. A costume for a role nobody had cast me in. 2 years inside group homes. 2 years learning the quiet brutality of institutional living. Those years had sharpened one skill above all others: how to shrink, how to watch, how to want nothing. That skill served me well in a room like this. The lawyer, Arthur Abernathy, looked as old as the volumes stacked behind him. Thin white hair swept over a pink scalp. Glasses that ballooned his pale, watery eyes into something amphibian. He offered no sympathy, just cleared his throat, a dry, papery rattle, and pushed a slim folder across the gleaming mahogany. "Mr. Davis," he started. His voice sounded like gravel dragged through sand. "I served as legal counsel to your grandfather, Alistair Davis, for over 30 years. His will is, to be direct, uncomplicated." He opened the folder, one sheet of paper inside. It seemed impossibly thin to hold the total weight of a man's entire existence. __, quote, _4, __. He let that figure hover between us. Not cruelty, just arithmetic. I felt nothing. Hadn't laid eyes on my grandfather since I was 10. He'd become a ghost, a rumor, a name typed into a file. The man who shipped me away. The man who, for 8 straight years, never sent a letter, never picked up a phone, not once. This pittance made perfect sense. A final, wordless confirmation of exactly what I was worth to him. But Abernathy didn't close the folder. "There is, however, one additional item," he continued. Same flat tone, same measured cadence. He reached into a desk drawer and withdrew a large yellowed manila envelope. Sealed with a thick wax stamp. The thing looked like it belonged to another century entirely. He slid it toward me across the polished wood. It stopped just short of my fingers, forcing me to lean forward and reach for it. My name stared up at me from the front, written in a spidery hand I didn't recognize. Leo Davies, __, quote, _6 __. I picked it up. Heavier than expected. Lumpy. Through the paper, I could feel it. The hard, unforgiving outline of a key. And the stiff edges of something folded tight. __, quote, _7 __. The words scraped out of me raw. First time I'd used my voice since walking into that office. Abernathy adjusted his glasses. It is the deed to a parcel of land in northern Oregon, approximately 5 acres, and the key, I presume, to whatever sits on it. He leaned back, fingers stippled like a man settling into a prayer he didn't believe in. Something flickered behind those thick lenses. Not pity, something more layered than that. Curiosity, maybe. He let that sit between us. Worthless, just like the cash. A final punchline from a man I could barely remember. My fingers tightened around the envelope. Every instinct I'd sharpened over 18 years in the system screamed the same thing. Take the $1,400. Find the cheapest motel room in the city. Figure out the rest of your life from a bed you're paying for by the week. That was the smart move. The survivor's move. But something wouldn't let me stand up. Maybe it was the finality pressing down on my chest. This was the last word from Alistair Davies. The last fragment of a puzzle I'd never been allowed to assemble. Why did he send me away? Why did he sever every thread between us? He wasn't a monster. The memories I still carried, fractured, faded, worn soft at the edges, were of a kind man. Calloused hands that smelled of sawdust and pine needles. A voice that was patient. A man who taught me how to skip stones on the river behind his small, cluttered house. That man did not fit inside the same story as the one who'd hand his only grandson to the state and vanish. Is there anything else? My voice came out low, almost a whisper. Abernathy hesitated, a fraction of a second, barely visible. But in that silent, pressurized room, the pause landed like a gunshot. Your grandfather was a complicated man, he said. His tone had softened. He made choices that were difficult to understand. He wanted you to have this. He said it was the only thing of value he had left to give. The way he placed his weight on that word, value, carried something heavier than money. I stood. The leather chair exhaled beneath me, relieved to be free of the tension. I tucked the envelope into the inside pocket of my ill-fitting suit jacket. We'll set one up. My assistant will handle it. I turned toward the door. His voice caught me before I reached the hallway. Leo! I looked back. Arthur Abernathy's face was unreadable. A professional mask held firmly in place. But his eyes, magnified, overexposed behind those thick lenses, told a different story entirely. He said, "The bus ride north was a slow, grinding extraction from the only life I knew. The city and its grid of familiar grey streets bled into suburbs. Suburbs frayed into farmland. Farmland dissolved into the dense, dark green of the Oregon wilderness. 14 hours. I watched the world slide past the glass, feeling like a ghost drifting along the margins of other people's lives. I had the $1,400 minus the bus ticket sitting in a new bank account. A cheap burner phone Carol had given me as a parting gift, and a heavy envelope from my grandfather. I'd cracked it open somewhere around hour 3, the drone of the engine a fitting soundtrack to what waited inside. An old iron key, heavy, pitted with rust. And a folded piece of paper. Not a modern deed, nothing typed, nothing notarized. A hand-drawn map on thick yellowed parchment. A circle in red ink with an X at its center. Coordinates written in a careful hand. And beneath them, a single instruction. Stark, simple, offering nothing beyond itself. Underscore underscore, quote underscore, 18 underscore, underscore. Less an inheritance than a scavenger hunt. One designed by a man who'd either lost his mind or was hiding something worth finding. The bus carried almost no one. A handful of solitary figures scattered across the seats, each sealed inside their own silence. Temperature dropped as the road climbed. The sky flattened into a hard, merciless gray. I kept turning over what Abernathy had told me. Some histories are better left buried. Why did he know that I didn't? What kind of history could my grandfather, a carpenter, a man who sanded wood and straightened crooked doorframes, possibly need to bury? The version of him I carried in my head built birdhouses. He shored up sagging porches for neighbors who paid him in coffee and conversation. That man didn't have secrets. He didn't carry iron keys to hidden locks. Or maybe he did. The memories I held were a child's memories, soft around the edges, colored by feeling, not fact. Maybe I never knew him at all. The iron key pressed against my ribs through the thin fabric of my jacket, steady, insistent, like a second heartbeat. 8 years in the system had beaten pragmatism into my bones. Don't hope for what isn't there. Hope is an exposed nerve, a thing people use against you when they need leverage. But that key weighed more than every lesson foster care ever taught me. Somewhere deep in my chest, in soil I thought nothing could grow from, something was pushing through, a stubborn green shoot of possibility. For the first time since I was 10 years old, I had a destination, a worthless scrap of land, a lock with no obvious door. It wasn't much, but it was a thread, a single fragile thread reaching back into a past that had been ripped away from me with surgical precision. The bus left me at a crossroads marked by one blinking yellow light. The town, generous word for it, was called Hemlock Creek. A gas station, a diner bleeding neon through a cracked sign, a general store with a faded Coca-Cola logo painted across old brick. The air hit me first. Sharp, clean, wet earth and pine resin filling my lungs like a language I'd forgotten I spoke. A childhood smell. It cracked something open in my ribcage, this phantom sensation of a life I once had. Nostalgia and dread braided together so tight I couldn't separate them. I stepped into the general store for a heavy-duty flashlight, batteries, water, and a few protein bars. The man behind the counter had a face like cracked leather and a smile that was both warm and worn thin by years. He asked, scanning my items. I set the map on the counter. His hand slowed, eyes narrowed just enough that I noticed. I hesitated, then I unfolded the map and slid it toward him. He fished reading glasses from his shirt pocket, squinted down at the paper, went quiet for a long beat. He murmured. He looked up at me with different eyes now. Then, casual, almost offhand, the words that hit me like a fist to the sternum. Quote 26, quote 27, I said. My throat tightened around the word. Quote 28, quote. His expression shifted. Something behind the friendliness crumbled into genuine sorrow. Quote underscore 29, quote. He turned and pointed through the window toward the road that disappeared into trees. Quote 30, quote. A pause. Quote 31, quote. I thanked him, paid, walked out into the cold. 5 miles felt like 50. Pavement crumbled to gravel, right on schedule. Each footstep crunching loud against a silence so deep it had weight. The pines rose on both sides, like sentinels standing watch over something they'd never speak about. Wind moved through their branches in long, slow exhales. The sky thickened. Clouds swelled dark and heavy with rain. I pulled my hood up, thin jacket, not built for this, and pushed my pace harder. The dirt track gave out where the brush took over, a wall of green so thick it looked deliberate. Like the land itself was saying, "Turn around." A cold drizzle had begun to fall. This was my grandfather's property, 5 acres of wild nothing. Blackberry canes twisted through ferns, young alder trees shoved against each other beneath ancient Douglas firs that blocked what little light remained. No cabin, no house, not even a foundation or a pile of old boards. Just forest, reclaiming itself, indifferent to whoever once held the deed. It was exactly as worthless as Arthur Abernathy had warned. Something cracked inside me. I had burned the last of my money getting here, burned the last of my hope, too. I was a kid with no family and no plan, chasing a dead man's riddle to a forgotten scrap of dirt in northern Oregon. I almost turned around, almost walked the 5 miles back to town, almost caught the next bus, headed anywhere that wasn't here. But I didn't. I pulled the map out again. North face of the ridge. The ridge itself wasn't hard to find. A steep rocky spine running along the back edge of the property like a crooked backbone. Its north face dropped away sharp and slick, coated in moss, streaming with rain. It looked impassable. I spent the next hour working my way along the base. Hands raw against wet stone, clothes soaked through to skin. The drizzle had turned into real rain, cold, steady, the kind that doesn't quit. The kind that settles into your bones and whispers, "Give up." I was ready to listen. Then my foot slipped on a loose patch of earth. Soil and rock cascaded down the slope in a small avalanche. And where the dirt had torn away, something showed through. A flat gray corner. Not stone, concrete. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I could hear it in my ears. I dropped to my knees and started clawing at the ground with bare hands, ripping at roots, tearing through mud. The cold didn't register anymore. The rain was irrelevant. I dug until my fingers went numb, then kept digging until they bled. What emerged from beneath that hillside was a large rectangular concrete slab set perfectly flush with the slope. Engineered, intentional, hidden. In its center, a recessed steel door, heavy gauge, its surface buried under rust so thick it looked like dried blood. No handle, just a single dark keyhole staring back at me like an eye. It was real. Whatever my grandfather had buried here, it was real. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I pulled the iron key from my pocket. It sat heavy in my palm, ancient, dense with purpose. I scraped mud from the keyhole with my thumbnail and guided the key in. Metal grated against metal, the lock resisting, fighting decades of corrosion. I pushed harder, then harder still. The key sank the rest of the way with a dull click I felt more than heard. I gripped it with both hands, turned. Nothing. I leaned into it. Every muscle in my forearms burning, teeth clenched, weight shifting forward. Then something deep inside that door surrendered. A groaning shudder rolled through the concrete, through the hillside, through my chest. A clang rang out across the forest, sharp, metallic, final. Crows erupted from the Douglas firs, screaming into the gray sky. The echo hung in the wet air like a held breath. From the edges of the door, a smell crept out. Trapped air, decades of stillness, the scent of things sealed away and left in the dark. I exhaled, braced my shoulder against the concrete frame, and pulled. The door was impossibly heavy. It scraped against its frame, metal shrieking on metal, a sound that set my teeth on edge. I hauled it open just wide enough to turn sideways and slip through. The flashlight clicked on. Its beam carved a sharp white cone through absolute blackness. I stepped across that threshold, out of the rain, out of everything I knew, and into my grandfather's secret. The air inside was dead, cold. It carried dust and damp concrete, and something else underneath. A faint metallic tang, like old machinery, like iron and oil left standing too long in a sealed room. The beam swung across the space. Concrete walls. A short, steep staircase descending into deeper dark. I pulled the heavy door shut behind me. It sealed behind me with a low, cavernous thunder that traveled up through the concrete and into my bones. Silence crushed in. Not quiet. Silence. The kind that pushes against you, fills your skull, makes your own heartbeat sound like something foreign. All I could hear was the saw-edge rasp of my own breathing. I was entombed. Panic hit like a fist to the sternum. What if I couldn't open it again from this side? Every nerve screamed at me to scramble back up those steps, to throw my weight against that hatch and prove I still had an exit. I almost did, but his words held me where I stood. Trust what you find. My grandfather's instruction, my grandfather's voice, somehow still louder than the fear. I forced one long breath through my teeth, then another, then I started down. The staircase ended in a wide, square chamber. I dragged the flashlight beam across its perimeter, my boots grinding against a floor thick with undisturbed dust. Poured concrete walls, massive, intentional. Steel I-beams bracing the ceiling overhead, like the ribs of something built to survive what nothing else could. This was a military bunker. No softer word fit. One entire wall was lined with shelving, gas masks stuffed into canvas pouches, sealed metal tins, rations probably, canteens, several jerry cans of water standing shoulder to shoulder. In the far corner, a narrow cot with a wool blanket folded so tight it could have passed inspection. Beside it, a small wooden table, a single chair. Nothing decorative, nothing personal. Every object chosen for function, nothing for comfort. It looked like it had been waiting, patiently, faithfully, for someone to arrive. For decades. A tomb. A shelter against whatever comes after everything ends. Why would a carpenter build this? What kind of fear drives a man who works with wood and nails to pour concrete walls 3 feet thick and bolt steel across a ceiling underground? What was Alistair Davies hiding from? The beam caught something beneath the cot. A large green metal footlocker, military issue, shoved back into the shadows. The only object in this entire room that felt like it belonged to a person rather than a protocol. No lock on it. My fingers were dead with cold, clumsy. I fumbled the latches for what felt like forever before they gave. 2 sharp snaps that ricocheted off the concrete like gunshots in that suffocating quiet. I heaved the lid open, cedar, mothballs, and underneath both, sawdust. That scent hit me somewhere below thought, below memory even, somewhere in the architecture of who I was before I had language for it. It wasn't a smell, it was him. Alistair Davies, standing over a workbench, wood shavings curling at his feet. Inside the locker, folded with military precision, a flannel shirt, denim overalls. Work clothes so worn the fabric had gone soft as skin. They carried that sawdust scent like it had been sealed in with them on purpose. Like he knew, someday, someone would need to find him here. Beneath the clothes, a small framed photograph. I lifted it out, wiped the glass with my thumb, and the air left my chest. A boy, 5, maybe 6, perched on an old man's shoulders, both of them squinting into the sun. Both of them grinning so wide their faces barely contained it. I didn't remember the photograph being taken, but the feeling, that feeling rose up through the years like something that had never actually left. The weight of his hands on my ankles, the height of the world from up there. The absolute, unshakable certainty that nothing could reach me. Safe. That was the word. I had been safe. The lump in my throat turned solid. I couldn't swallow around it. At the very bottom of the footlocker, beneath the clothes, beneath the photograph, beneath everything my grandfather had chosen to preserve, a stack of envelopes, bound together with a length of rough twine. At least a dozen of them, all addressed to me in that spidery, deliberate hand I'd already come to recognize like a second pulse. One envelope sat on top, separated from the rest. A single word written across its face. First. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The knot in the twine fought me. I sat down on the edge of the cot, springs groaning beneath my weight, the sound enormous in that dead, still air. The bunker swallowed every noise and gave back nothing. When I tore the envelope open, the rip of paper was so loud it startled me. Several pages, crisp. Every line packed with that tight, controlled script. Letters pressed hard into the paper, as if the pen itself had something urgent to say. I smoothed the first page across my knee, took a breath that didn't quite fill my lungs, and I read. That was how it started. My eyes moved across the page. My heart slammed against my ribs, like something caged and desperate to break free. The first handwriting started to swim. Letters dissolved into shapes that refused to hold still. Cold from the concrete floor seeped upward through my jeans, through my skin, into the marrow of my bones. I couldn't stand, couldn't shift my weight, couldn't do anything but keep reading. Croft didn't take kindly to threats. He made it clear that if I ever spoke a word, he would destroy everything I loved. And by then, Leo, the only thing I loved was you. Your parents were gone, and you were all I had. He knew that. He had me followed. He had you followed. I saw them watching you play at the park, sitting in a car outside your school. They weren't just watching, they were hunting. I lived in a state of constant, gut-wrenching terror, not for myself, but for you. I couldn't go to the police because Croft had people everywhere, and I couldn't prove the threats without revealing the evidence, which would have put you in even more danger. I was trapped. I stopped. My chest had cinched shut like a fist closing around my lungs. Breath came in thin, useless sips, not enough to feel anything. And then memory hit me, a flash, bright and unwanted. I remembered being watched. I told my grandfather once about a strange car, dark, idling at the curb, and the color drained from his face so fast it scared me more than the car did. His expression became something I had no name for at that age. A mask. Rigid. Bloodless. He told me it was nothing, just my imagination. It wasn't nothing. My hands trembled as I lifted the letter again. Quote 36. The letter slipped from my fingers, fell to the concrete without a sound. One tear broke loose, hot. It carved a slow, crooked line through the grime caked on my cheek. Then a second, then a third, and after that I lost count because there was no counting anymore. I broke. The sobs came like seizures, violent, full-body convulsions that ripped through my chest and bounced off the concrete walls of that silent tomb. The sound was ugly, guttural, not the kind of crying you see in movies, the kind that makes your throat raw, the kind that sounds like an animal caught in something it cannot escape. 8 years of pain, 8 years of white-hot anger directed at a man who deserved none of it. 8 years of a loneliness so total, so bone-deep, that I had forgotten what it felt like to not be lonely. I had worn it so long it became my skin. I wasn't abandoned, I was protected. In the most brutal, most cruel, most selfless way a human being can protect another, I had been loved. I wept for the grandfather I had hated, the man who built his own prison out of silence and grief just to keep me breathing. I wept for the 10-year-old boy standing in the lobby of a social services office, watching the only person he trusted walk away. That boy who learned to stack bricks around his heart, so high, so thick, that nothing, not kindness, not warmth, not a single offered hand could reach him. I cried until there was nothing left to give, until I was just a hollowed-out, aching shell, sitting on a cot in the dark. The truth of my past, stripped naked by words from a man already in the ground. When that storm of grief finally broke, what it left behind wasn't emptiness. It was something stranger, an unnerving stillness. The bunker didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It had shifted into something else entirely, a sanctuary. A place where lies couldn't survive. I sat there on that cold floor for what might have been hours. The flashlight beam was fading, growing weaker by the minute. The silence of all that earth above me pressed down like a living thing. The letter lay crumpled on the concrete where I dropped it. That last paragraph, still unread. I reached for it. My hands were steady now, steady in a way they hadn't been in years. And I read the final words. This bunker is yours now, Leo. There are supplies here to last you for months. There is more information hidden away if you feel you need it, but you don't have to look for it. My fight does not have to be your fight. You are free. You can take what little money I left you and walk away. Start a new life. Forget about me and forget about Silas Croft. That is all I ever wanted for you, to be safe and to be free. Whatever you choose, know that I loved you. Know that every day I was proud of you. Your loving grandfather, Alistair. The choice he offered was so clean it cut like a blade. Walk away and live free, or dig deeper and inherit a war. For 8 years, my entire existence had been about survival, keeping my head low, staying invisible, not making waves. The smart move, the same move, was obvious. Take the money, disappear. Honor the sacrifice by living the exact kind of free life he'd purchased for me at such a staggering price. But could I actually do that? Could I walk away knowing Silas Croft was still breathing, still operating? The man who'd stolen my childhood from me, the man who'd sentenced my grandfather to years of isolated, silent agony. All that anger I'd carried for so long, the fury I'd aimed at Alistair for abandoning me, that rage finally had a rightful target. It sat in my gut like a stone, cold, dense, demanding something I couldn't name yet. Justice, maybe, or something rawer than justice. And then there was the other part. The part that had been starving for connection since I was 10 years old. This story, his story, our story, was the only thread still tying me to someone who'd loved me. Walking away from it would mean abandoning him a second time. And I'd already spent 8 years believing he'd abandoned me first. I couldn't do that to him again. Not now that I knew the truth. If you've ever stood at a crossroads like that, a moment where the person you were simply cannot be the person you carry forward, then you already understand what that felt like. Terrifying, electrifying. The past handing you a reason. The future demanding a decision. I want to pause here for just a moment. If any part of your own story is echoing inside what I'm telling you right now, I'm glad you're here. This is a place for people who've had to navigate the hard stuff on their own. People who've had to dig their own truth out from under years of pain and silence. If you hit subscribe, you become part of something, a community that gets it. That matters more than I can say. Now, back to that bunker. Because what I chose down there in the dark wasn't just about my history. It was about who I would become from that moment forward. I folded the letter with care, slid it back into the envelope, set it down gently, like it was sacred. Because it was. I would not walk away. I couldn't. I owed it to Alistair. I owed it to the 10-year-old boy who never got a proper goodbye. I needed to know the rest. I needed to see this through to whatever end was waiting. His fight belonged to me now. The letter had mentioned more information, hidden somewhere in this room. I stood. My joints screamed, stiff from cold and hours of sitting on concrete. I grabbed the weakening flashlight and began to search. Methodical, deliberate. I started with the shelves, tapping the walls behind each one, checking tins of food for false bottoms. Nothing. I moved to the cot. Lifted the thin mattress, ran my fingers along every welt on the metal frame. Nothing there either. I went over every square inch of that space. Walls, floor seams, the edges where concrete met concrete. My frustration built with each dead end. Where would a man like my grandfather hide something that mattered? A practical man, a careful man. He would tuck it somewhere obvious enough to be overlooked, or somewhere so unlikely that no one would ever bother searching. My gaze drifted downward to the floor. Solid concrete, nothing remarkable. But beneath the spot where that cot had sat, where the footlocker once rested, the surface looked different. I dropped to my knees. My palm swept across it slowly. A seam, barely visible. A hairline fracture tracing a perfect square, 2 feet by 2 feet. I pressed the edge. Nothing. I fished the iron key from my pocket, the only tool on me, and worked its tip into that crack. Pried upward. The concrete shifted with a low, grinding scrape. A panel. A lid. I got my fingers beneath it and heaved. Heavy, but it gave. Underneath lay a small dark hollow, and sitting inside that hollow was another box. Steel this time. The kind people use for documents and cash. No lock on it. It was just sitting there, waiting. I pulled it free, far heavier than something that size had any right to be. I carried it to the table and set it down. My heart hammered again, slow, dense thuds, echoing through the silence of that bunker. One breath, deep. Then I opened it. The air left my body. Cash. The entire top layer was cash. Stack after stack of $100 bills, each bundle cinched with plain rubber bands. I didn't count it. Tens of thousands at least, maybe more. A fortune by any measure. Enough to vanish, enough to live quietly and comfortably for years. The escape he had promised me. But underneath all that money sat something worth infinitely more. A thick, leather-bound ledger. And another envelope, sealed with the same wax stamp as the one Arthur Abernathy had given me. I broke the seal on the letter first. Same handwriting. But the tone had shifted completely. This was not a grieving grandfather anymore. This was a man sharpening himself for battle. Leo, it began. If you have found this, you have chosen not to run. I am sorry for that. I am sorry this has fallen to you. But I am also proud. This is the choice I could never make. The money is yours no matter what. Use it to protect yourself. But this ledger, this is the weapon. It contains everything. Every illegal transaction, every bribe, every threat Silas Croft ever made. It is my confession and his conviction. All in one. I was his bookkeeper in the beginning. I saw it all. It's all in there. The names, the dates, the accounts. It is the truth. For years, Croft has been trying to acquire all the land on this ridge for a luxury resort development. He has bullied and bankrupted every family here. My 5 acres are the last holdout. I stopped breathing for a moment. Read that part again. This worthless piece of rock is the linchpin in his multi-million-dollar plan. He thinks with me gone, the land will be his. He doesn't know about you. The letter continued, methodical, precise. It detailed exactly what the ledger contained, how to decipher the codes my grandfather had built into it. Page after page, documenting a criminal empire from the inside out. And then, the final lines arrived like a hand gripping my shoulder. You have 2 choices, son. Take the money and the ledger and disappear. He will never find you. Or take this to Arthur Abernathy. He was my only friend, the only one I trusted. He will know what to do. The choice is yours. Avenge me or live for me. Either way, be safe. I closed my eyes. The ledger sat in my lap, and I could feel the weight of it. Not just the paper and the binding, the weight of what it held. A book of sins. My grandfather's sins. Croft's sins. Tangled together, inseparable. A heavy inheritance. Right as the weight of everything was crushing down on me, a sound cut through the silence like a blade. Sharp. Foreign. Wrong for this place. It took a bit before my brain caught up. My phone. That cheap burner rattling in my pocket, its teeny ringtone and obscenity in this underground tomb. I dug it out with clumsy fingers and answered. __, quote _ 37 __. His voice hit different this time. Tight. Urgent. Every trace of that detached, paper-shuffling lawyer had burned away completely. The words left my mouth sounding hollow, like they belonged to someone standing 10 feet behind me. A development firm, Croft Enterprises, had just filed an accelerated foreclosure claim against my grandfather's property. Abernathy spoke fast, each word beaten off clean. They had produced a promissory note, supposedly signed by Alistair, securing a massive debt against the land. They claimed he defaulted. The note looked legitimate on its face, but Abernathy knew Alistair, knew he would never have been that reckless. It had to be a forgery. The problem was, they had a judge in their pocket. An expedited hearing had already been granted. 48 hours to file a formal response, or the court hands them the title. They were trying to steal it, and they were moving fast. Silas Croft. That name was no longer ink on old paper, no longer a ghost trapped inside a letter. He was flesh and blood, and he was striking now. My grandfather had been dead less than a week, and his enemy was already clawing at the gate. The timing was surgical. Croft must have been circling, patient, watching, waiting for Alistair to die, banking on the property tumbling into messy probate where he could devour it for pennies. What he never anticipated was me. Never anticipated the bunker. Never anticipated the letters. Never anticipated the ledger sitting heavy across my thighs right now. The world above had kept spinning while I sat in darkness, drowning in the past. Now past and present was slamming into each other. "Leo, are you there?" Abernathy's voice strained through the speaker. I stared at the ledger, at the stacks of cash. Avenge me or live for me. There was no choice anymore. Croft had erased whatever choice existed. He wasn't just reaching for the land. He was reaching for my grandfather's memory, trying to scrub the last trace of him from the earth, pave over his life, pour concrete over his bones, build a resort on top of everything he sacrificed. Something cold and clean settled through my chest. Not anger exactly. Certainty. The fear just left, drained out like water through a cracked floor. What replaced it was hard, unyielding, structural. I was not a scared kid from the system anymore. I was Alistair Davies' grandson, and this was my land. "I hear you, Mr. Abernathy," I said. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. Steady. Calm. The voice of a man who understood precisely what needed to happen next. "I think I have something you need to see. Something that's going to stop Mr. Croft for good." The next 48 hours dissolved into motion and purpose. I hiked back toward Hemlock Creek with the steel box buried in my duffel bag. The cash pressed against my spine, a startling, grounding weight. Every step felt different from the aimless wandering of the kid who had walked this same road less than a day before. That kid had no direction. I had a mission. I caught the first bus heading back toward the city. My mind wouldn't stop moving the entire ride. Abernathy had told me to call him from a safe line. I was already on my way. I didn't share details over the phone, only that I'd found what my grandfather left behind. He told me to come straight to his office. Any hour, didn't matter. I reached his building late that night. The city blazed around me, all glass and electric light, but it felt thin. Translucent. Like a projection on a screen. The only thing that felt real was the bunker, the letters, the crushing weight of the ledger against my back. Abernathy let me in himself, a side entrance, no receptionist, no witnesses. The office sat cloaked in shadow, one desk lamp burning, throwing long dark fingers across the walls. He looked exhausted, but those eyes were razor wire. "What did you find, son?" His voice barely above a breath. I didn't answer him. I set my duffel on his desk, unzipped it, pulled out the steel box, and cracked it open. Then I laid the ledger down on that polished mahogany surface and stepped back. Abernathy stared at it. His face gave away nothing. Seconds stretched. Then his hand, trembling, reached forward and touched the cracked leather cover. 45, he whispered. Not to me, to himself. To the ghost of a man who wasn't there to hear it. I told him to destroy it, told him to disappear, but he was too stubborn, too damn honorable. His gaze lifted to mine, and the mask fell. Not a crack. The whole thing came off at once. What I saw underneath wasn't a lawyer. It was a man carrying decades of grief, and a loyalty so fierce it had calcified into something permanent. His jaw tightened. We worked through the night. Every hour bled into the next. Abernathy sat across from me, translating my grandfather's coded shorthand line by line, and it was all there. Every filthy detail. A full decade of criminal enterprise documented with a carpenter's precision. Bribes funneled to county officials. Extortion schemes run against small landowners. Fraudulent loan applications stacked like cordwood. Enough evidence to collapse not just Croft, but half the local power structure along with him. Dawn crept into the office, pale grey light edging through the blinds. Abernathy closed the ledger slowly, set both palms flat on the desk. 49, he said. His voice carried no triumph, just grim, iron satisfaction. 50. He copied the most damning pages. Then he picked up the phone and dialed a contact at the state attorney's office. A man who owed him a favor. A man who despised corruption on principle. The machinery of justice, seized and rusted for years, groaned back to life. The day of the hearing, I sat in the last row. Abernathy had been clear. Stay invisible. I did. Silas Croft was up front. Silver-haired, expensive suit. Confident smile aimed at his legal team like a weapon. He looked like everything respectable. A benefactor, a builder, not a predator. He never scanned the gallery, never once looked behind him. I was nothing to him, a ghost sitting among ghosts. When the judge called the case forward, Croft's attorney rose and presented the forged promissory note. A theatrical flourish, every seal in place, every signature convincing. It looked airtight, unsurmountable. Abernathy stood. He didn't touch the note, didn't even acknowledge it. He simply said, quote _51_1 file, thick. He placed it on the bench. The judge opened it. Silence swallowed the courtroom whole. I kept my eyes locked on Croft. The smile cracked first. Then his gaze snapped sideways, from the judge to Abernathy and back. Confusion bleeding into something sharper. Fear. The judge's face went pale. He raised his head, but not toward the attorneys. He looked past them, toward the back of the room. Two men in dark suits had slipped through the doors without a sound. State investigators. They walked the center aisle with no urgency at all, calm, methodical. They reached Croft. One of them leaned close and spoke words only Croft could hear. The color left his face like water running out of a cracked vessel. The pillar crumbled. The monument collapsed into what it had always been, hollow. There was no shouting, no dramatic outburst, just the quiet, surgical disassembly of a man who had built his empire on other people's silence. They walked him out, that expensive suit hanging off him now like a costume that no longer fit. The case was dismissed. The land was mine, uncontested, unencumbered, free and clear. The war was over, and I had won it with a dead man's ledger and a debt repaid. In the weeks that followed, the story cracked open across the local papers. Croft's empire had been nothing more than a house of cards, propped up by intimidation, held together with fraud, and my grandfather's ledger was the wind that scattered every last one. Once the arrest became public, others stepped forward. People who had been silent for years, people with their own stories, their own evidence. What started as one man's truth became an avalanche that buried Croft beneath the weight of everything he had done. I used a portion of the money my grandfather had left me to pay Arthur Abernathy for his work. He tried to refuse, insisted on it actually, but I wasn't about to let that debt go unacknowledged. The rest went into a bank account, a safety net, a foundation I had never once possessed. But the real inheritance, the thing that mattered, was never the money. It was the land. It was the bunker. It was the soil itself. I went back to Hemlock Creek, bought a used pickup truck, loaded it with supplies, and I started working. 5 acres of overgrown brush, tangled vines and shadow. I cleared it by hand, section by section, letting sunlight hit the forest floor for the first time in years. My palms blistered, my shoulders ached. I didn't care. I was working with my hands the way he had. Same dirt, same ridge, same wind coming off the valley. I found the foundation of his old house, the one I could barely remember, and something inside me shifted. Not just recognition, ambition. I started dreaming about rebuilding it. The bunker lost its darkness. I aired it out, scrubbed every surface from ceiling to floor. It wasn't a secret anymore. It was history, my sanctuary. I left the cot and the small table exactly where they were. A quiet memorial to a man who had spent so many lonely years underground, keeping watch over a grandson who didn't even know he was being watched. Some evenings I would climb down there, sit in that profound silence, and read his other letters. These weren't about Silas Croft. They weren't about evidence or danger or corporate greed. They were about me. He had written them over the years, one for every birthday he missed. He wrote about what he imagined I was doing at each age, what kind of boy I had been, what kind of man I was becoming. He wrote about his pride, his regret, his love, unbroken, unending, stretching across every year of silence like a bridge I couldn't see until now. He had never been gone, not really. He had been with me the whole time, watching from a distance. His love had been a shield around me, one I never knew existed. One afternoon, the old man from the general store drove his truck up the newly cleared track to the property. He climbed out slow, holding a thermos in one weathered hand. "Figured you might be thirsty," he said. Handed me a steaming cup of coffee without ceremony. "Heard what you did, what your granddad did." We stood there for a long while, side by side, looking out over the ridge. The trees, the light, the land stretching out beneath us like something patient and alive. Alistair was a hard man, the store owner said quietly. But he was a good one. He loved this land, and he loved you more than anything. He just had a hard way of showing it. A lump formed in my throat, tight, familiar. "I know," I said. "I finally know." I wasn't a ward of the state anymore, not a statistic, not a file number collecting dust in some caseworker's cabinet. I was Leo Davies, son of this land, grandson of a man who moved heaven and earth, and then buried himself beneath it to keep me safe. My story was never one of abandonment. I had just been reading it wrong. It was a story of sacrifice. Of love so fierce, it chose to be misunderstood rather than put me at risk. It was a story of coming home, not to a place that had been waiting, but to a place I had to rebuild with my own hands before it could hold me. My grandfather left me with a choice: run from the past or build a future on its foundation. I chose to build, and standing here today on this land that carries my name, I feel something I never thought I would possess. Peace. Not the fragile kind that shatters when the wind changes, the kind that settles deep into your bones because you finally understand where you came from and why it matters. The past doesn't have to be a prison. It can be a blueprint. It can be the solid ground beneath your feet, if you're willing to dig down far enough to find it. So I want to ask you something. What foundation are you building on? What parts of your own history have you had to reclaim, fight for, excavate, piece together to become who you are today? If this story reached something in you, if you have ever had to claw your way toward your own truth, I would be honored if you shared a piece of your journey in the comments below. Your stories matter here, every single one. This is a place for people who understand that the deepest truths grow in the hardest ground. Thank you for listening, and if you haven't already, please subscribe and be part of this conversation, because we all deserve a place to call home.